In the Gospel of Thomas, there's a verse the church couldn't fully remove but buried under centuries of mistranslation. Jesus tells his disciples, "You are the salt of the earth, but if salt loses its savor, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot." The church taught this as a metaphor about moral purity, about being a good example in the world, but the Gnostics, who preserved the actual teaching, knew what Jesus really meant. He wasn't talking about behavior. He wasn't talking about ethics. He was talking about salt as a physical substance that disrupts Archon surveillance technology, because salt doesn't just season food. Salt creates interference patterns in electromagnetic fields, and Archons who monitor chosen ones through frequency tracking lose their signal the moment salt is arranged in specific geometric configurations. The early Christians knew this. They would scatter salt in doorways, draw salt lines around their beds, create salt circles in their meeting spaces, not as superstition, not as folk magic, but as actual counter-surveillance technology that made them invisible to the entities hunting them. And it worked so effectively that when the Roman Church consolidated power, one of the first things they did was reframe salt practices as pagan ritual, so Christians would stop using the one substance that made them untrackable. Tonight, you're learning the exact salt pattern Jesus taught to his inner circle, the one that breaks Archon monitoring instantly, and you're going to place it in your space before you sleep, because the moment that pattern is set, every frequency cord they've attached to you for surveillance cuts out, and you become a blank space on their grid. If you're breaking Archon monitoring tonight, comment "Salt breaks the signal" right now. The Archons don't control you through physical force. They can't. They exist in dimensions adjacent to material reality, which means they can observe, influence, and harvest, but they cannot directly intervene in three-dimensional space the way a human can. Their entire system of control depends on monitoring. They track your emotional frequency, your thought patterns, your energy fluctuations, and they use that data to predict your behavior, manipulate your decisions, and position circumstances that keep you locked in loops. But monitoring requires a stable signal. They need to maintain a consistent frequency connection to your field, like a radar lock, and if that connection breaks, if the signal suddenly goes dark, they lose you. They can't track what they can't detect. And this is where salt becomes devastating to their entire surveillance infrastructure. Salt, sodium chloride, is one of the most electrically active substances on Earth. When dissolved in water, it separates into charged ions, sodium positive, chlorine negative, and those ions create measurable electrical conductivity. Your body uses salt for nerve transmission, for muscle contraction, for every electrical signal that moves through your nervous system. But what most people don't know, what the Gnostics understood and modern science is only now confirming, is that salt also interacts with non-physical frequencies. It doesn't just conduct electricity in material form. It creates interference in the electromagnetic spectrum that extends into dimensions where Archons operate. When you arrange salt in specific geometric patterns, you're not casting a spell. You're building a frequency disruptor, a pattern that generates standing waves of interference that Archon monitoring systems cannot penetrate. It's the spiritual equivalent of white noise, a signal so chaotic and dense that it drowns out everything else. And the moment that pattern is active in your space, every surveillance cord they've attached to your field gets scrambled. The data stream cuts out, the connection fails, and you vanish from their tracking grid. The church removed every technical reference to salt from Scripture because they couldn't allow Christians to know that protection from demonic surveillance was this simple, this accessible, this undeniable. If believers knew they could take ordinary table salt and arrange it in a specific pattern and immediately break every monitoring frequency the enemy had established, what would they need priests for? What would they need exorcisms for? What would they need the entire institutional hierarchy of spiritual warfare for? The system collapses when the solution is something you can buy at any grocery store and deploy in under 5 minutes. And that's exactly why the teaching was suppressed. not because it didn't work, because it worked too well. Jesus taught the salt pattern to his inner circle in private, away from crowds, because he knew this wasn't information everyone was ready for. Most people weren't being monitored at the level chosen ones were. Most people generated predictable frequencies, lived within the parameters the Archons designed, and required minimal surveillance. But chosen ones, the ones whose frequencies were different, whose soul contracts involved waking up, whose very presence disrupted the control system just by existing, those were the ones under constant watch. The Archons couldn't afford to let chosen ones move unmonitored because chosen ones were the ones capable of breaking others free. So, they established permanent surveillance on every chosen one they identified, frequency cords attached to the energy field, monitoring nodes positioned in living spaces, tracking algorithms running continuously to map emotional patterns and predict awakening triggers. And Jesus knew that for chosen ones to do what they came here to do, they needed to break that surveillance first. They needed to move in the dark, untracked, undetected, free to operate without the enemy watching every step. And the fastest, simplest, most effective way to break Archon monitoring was salt arranged in the pattern he was about to teach them. The pattern is called the Seal of Severance, and it's one of the oldest protective geometries in human history. You see versions of it in Sumerian clay tablets, in Egyptian temple floors, in Celtic knotwork, in medieval grimoires, because every mystery tradition that understood how Archons operate rediscovered the same truth. This specific arrangement of salt creates a boundary frequency that monitoring systems cannot cross. It doesn't block the Archons themselves. It blocks their ability to receive signal from inside the boundary. They can still see you if they're physically close enough to manifest in dense form, but they cannot track you remotely. They cannot read your frequency from a distance. They cannot maintain the surveillance infrastructure that allows them to manipulate your reality from behind the scenes. The pattern is simple, almost absurdly simple, which is why it's so dangerous to the control system. You don't need rare ingredients. You don't need blessed salt, or salt harvested under specific moon phases, or salt prayed over by priests. You need salt, any salt, table salt, sea salt, kosher salt, Himalayan pink salt, it doesn't matter. The power isn't in the type of salt. The power is in the geometry of how you arrange it, and the understanding you hold while you create the pattern. Here's how you do it. You're going to need enough salt to create a visible line on your floor, about half a cup to a full cup depending on the size of the space you're sealing. You're going to create this pattern on the floor, in the room where you sleep or where you spend the most time, the space where you're most vulnerable, where your frequency is most exposed. You start by pouring a circle of salt on the ground, not a perfect machine-drawn circle, just a circle made by hand, intentional, continuous, with no breaks in the line. The circle represents infinite consciousness, the monad, the boundary of divine awareness that nothing operating below that frequency can penetrate. The circle is the outer seal, the first layer of disruption. As you pour the circle, you're not just making a shape, you're setting an intention. This space operates at monad frequency. Signals below this range cannot enter. Once the circle is complete, you move to the interior. Inside the circle, you're going to draw a triangle using salt, a triangle that touches the inner edge of the circle at 3 points, creating a perfect balance. The triangle represents stability, the 3-point anchoring system that locks the pattern into material reality and prevents it from dissipating. Each point of the triangle is a frequency anchor, and together they create a field inside the circle that remains stable regardless of external interference. Inside the triangle, you place a single dot of salt in the exact center. This dot represents you, the chosen one, the localized point of consciousness inside the infinite circle, protected by the stable structure of the triangle. And this is the key to why the pattern works. The geometry mirrors the structure of reality itself. Circle equals monad, infinite awareness. Triangle equals material stability, the 3-dimensional anchor. Dot equals individual consciousness, you, the divine spark in temporary form. When you arrange salt in this configuration, you're not symbolically representing these concepts. You're physically encoding them into the electromagnetic field of your space using a substance that conducts frequency. The salt holds the pattern. The pattern broadcasts interference, and the interference makes you untrackable. The moment the seal is complete, Archon monitoring systems lose connection. They don't know why. They just know the signal dropped. You were there, frequency clear, data streaming, and then suddenly nothing. Blank space, no signal, no data, no feed, and they cannot re-establish the lock as long as the soul pattern remains intact. Chosen ones who place the seal of severance in their space report the same thing within the first night. The atmosphere shifts. Rooms that felt watched suddenly feel neutral. Sleep that was restless becomes deep and undisturbed. Dreams that were chaotic or invasive become clear, coherent, and free of intrusion. That's not the salt blessing your space. That's the salt disrupting the monitoring frequency, and without surveillance access, the Archons cannot inject thought forms into your dream state, cannot read your subconscious processing, cannot harvest the emotional energy you generate while your conscious defenses are down. The seal doesn't just protect you while you're awake. It protects you in the state where you're most vulnerable, the hours between midnight and 4 a.m., when your energy field is most open, and the Archons do the majority of their harvesting and data collection. Here's what happens in the days after you set the seal. The first thing you'll notice is mental clarity. Decisions that felt impossible suddenly become obvious. Directions that were clouded suddenly become clear. That's not you suddenly getting smarter. That's Archon interference being cut off. They manipulate primarily through confusion. They keep you in perpetual doubt, second-guessing, mental fog, so you never move forward with certainty. But when the monitoring is broken, when they can't track your thought patterns in real time and insert counter thoughts to derail you, the fog lifts. Your mind becomes your own again. The second thing you'll notice is that attacks through other people stop. The random arguments, the sudden conflicts, the people who would normally drain you or provoke you, they lose interest. They stop engaging. It's not that they consciously decided to leave you alone. It's that the Archons, using those people as proxies, can no longer track your frequency to know when you're vulnerable. They can't position the attack because they can't see the opening. You've gone dark. You've disappeared from their tactical grid. And, without real-time surveillance, their ability to manipulate your external environment collapses. The third thing you'll notice, and this is the one that confirms beyond doubt that the seal is working, is that you'll feel them testing the boundary. You'll be lying in bed at night and you'll sense presence at the edge of the room, pressure near the walls, attention focused on the space you're in, but unable to penetrate. That's the Archons realizing they've lost signal and attempting to re-establish connection by moving closer, trying to get inside the seal's range. But as long as the soul pattern is intact, they can't. They'll circle, they'll test, they'll push against the interference field, and they'll fail. And after a few nights of failed attempts, they'll redirect their resources elsewhere because you've become too expensive to monitor. They'll move to targets that are still broadcasting clear signal. The soul pattern needs to remain undisturbed to maintain effectiveness. If the line breaks, if someone walks through the circle and scatters the salt, the seal loses integrity and the monitoring can re-establish. So, you place the pattern in a location where it won't be accidentally disrupted. If you live alone, this is easy. You create the seal in your bedroom, around your bed if there's space, or in the center of the room where you sleep. If you live with others who won't understand, you create the seal in a closet, under furniture, in a space that's yours and won't be disturbed. The size doesn't matter. A small seal, 6 inches across, works the same as a large seal 6 feet across. The geometry is what creates the interference, not the scale. Some chosen ones create portable seals. They'll take a small piece of fabric or paper, Draw the pattern in salt, let the salt settle into the fibers, and then fold it and carry it in their pocket or wear it in a pouch around their neck. The pattern remains encoded in the material even after the loose salt is gone, and it continues to generate interference as long as it stays on your body. This is what the Gnostics did when they were being hunted by Roman authorities. They couldn't create large, visible salt circles in their homes without drawing suspicion. So they made pocket seals, tiny versions of the same pattern that they carried constantly, and they kept them off the Archon tracking grid even while they moved through hostile territory. The church later reframed this practice as carrying blessed sachets or saint medallions, stripping the technical function and replacing it with superstitious symbolism so people would stop understanding how the technology actually worked. You need to set the seal tonight, not because I'm telling you to, because tonight, right now, having watched this teaching, your frequency is activated. Your consciousness is elevated. You're in a state where the pattern will lock in with maximum effectiveness. If you wait until tomorrow, you'll have returned to baseline frequency. The activation will have faded. You'll still be able to create the seal, but you'll be starting from a lower state, and it will take more effort to generate the interference field. But tonight, right now, your field is already charged. The teaching has primed you. Your awareness is focused on the archons, on surveillance, on breaking free. That focus is frequency. And when you create the salt pattern while holding that frequency, the pattern absorbs it. The seal becomes an amplifier of your current state, broadcasting the disruption continuously from the moment it's set. This is the same principle Jesus used when he taught his disciples under specific conditions, at specific moments, in specific states of consciousness. He knew that teachings received in activated states encode more deeply, anchor more permanently, and produce faster results. He wasn't just giving information, he was timing the transmission for maximum impact. And right now, this moment, this teaching, this is your activated state. Use it. After you set the seal, don't announce it. Don't tell people what you've done. Don't post about it on social media. The more you talk about your protection methods, the more attention you draw, and attention is frequency. You want to move quietly. You want to operate in silence. You want the archons to lose your signal and never understand why. Chosen ones who broadcast their techniques publicly often find that the attacks intensify before they decrease because they've painted a target on themselves by revealing they know how the system works. The archons monitor social media. They track keywords. They identify chosen ones who are teaching others how to break free. And those chosen ones get escalated to higher level surveillance because they're not just escaping themselves, they're helping others escape. So, you use the seal. You benefit from the seal. And you stay quiet about the seal until you're certain you're moving in frequencies the archons can no longer touch. The salt pattern is simple, almost absurdly simple, and that's exactly why the church had to suppress it. Circle, triangle, dot. Salt arranged on your floor or carried in your pocket. That's it. No complex ritual, no priest required, no expensive materials, no years of training, just salt and geometry and understanding. And the moment the pattern is set, Archon monitoring breaks. They lose signal. They lose data. They lose the ability to track, predict, and manipulate your reality from behind the scenes. Jesus taught this to the chosen ones because he knew they were under the heaviest surveillance. He knew the enemy would do everything possible to stop them from fulfilling their purpose. And he knew that for them to move freely, to operate effectively, to do what they came here to do, they needed to become invisible to the tracking systems first. The seal of severance is how you become invisible. Not by hiding, not by suppressing your frequency, but by generating interference so dense that the surveillance systems cannot penetrate it. You're still here. You're still broadcasting, but the signal is scrambled, chaotic, unreadable. And to the archons scanning for your frequency, you've vanished. You're a ghost on their grid, and ghosts can move freely because no one knows where they are. If you're setting the seal of severance tonight, do 3 things right now. First, Comment Salt breaks the signal below. Declare your intention to break their monitoring and let other chosen ones see that this is real, that others are doing it, that the pattern works. Second, subscribe to Divine Codes, because the advanced protection patterns and frequency disruption techniques are coming, and you'll want to know how to expand this seal into full spatial shielding that makes your entire home a dead zone to Archon surveillance. Third, like this video so other chosen ones discover the Salt pattern before the Archons suppress this teaching again. Do all three now. Then tonight, before you sleep, get salt from your kitchen. Pour a circle on your floor. Draw a triangle inside. Place a dot in the center. And within minutes, you'll feel the shift. The pressure lifts. The watching stops. The signal breaks. And you're free. Not because you fought them, because you disappeared. Jesus taught a simple salt pattern: circle, triangle, dot. Archon monitoring breaks the moment it's set. And once you're off their grid, you're untouchable. You're dark. You're sovereign, and they'll never find you again.